Zencaster is going. We're good. Pre-flight check has ended.
Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. This is your fucking podcast about a concert hall.
Yes. Hello, and welcome to Well, There's Your Problem. It's a podcast about engineering disasters with slides. I'm Justin Rosniak. I'm the person who is talking right now. My pronouns are he and him. Okay, go.
I am Alice Caldwell-Kelly. I am the person who is talking now. My pronouns are she and her. Liam.
Hey, Liam. Hi, I'm Liam Anderson.
Hi, I'm the colony of bacteria piloting Liam Anderson.
I'm the corpse of Liam Anderson. Yes, I am sick. My pronouns are he, him. I'm going to spend most of this episode on mute, simply so you don't hear me sniffle every 30 seconds.
Nice.
I know the people love their sniffles, but yeah, I'm not going to do that to you. I'm not going to Alice Caldwell-Kelly your asses. And we have a guest. Hello, guest.
We have a guest.
Hello, I'm Kate Wagner. I'm an architecture critic. My pronouns are she, her.
And you know a lot about architectural acoustics.
Why is that, Kate? Tell us.
Yeah, I went to grad school.
Oh. Rookie mistake. I dropped out of grad school.
I know, so true about grad school. I was very close to doing that. But I finished, and I wrote my thesis on concert halls from mid-century. So yeah, I know a lot about this subject. This concert hall changed everything in architectural acoustics.
I assume
I mean, that's
for the
like
better,
kind of an
right?
understatement. It was, yes, for the better, I would say. Like, this was kind of like the Pruitt-Igoe, or I guess not even really like but like, you know what I mean? Like, this was like the thing that like initiated an entire discourse that changed a field that happened around the same time. And modernism was like a subject in that field. Even though like with Pruitt-Igoe, for example, like there were other factors involved that for the failure that almost none of them were architectural, actually involved like public funding and racism and all kinds of things. But Avery Fisher Hall, Philharmonic Hall, David Geffen Hall, you know, whatever it's called now. And
the hall we are looking at.
Have fewer names.
Just pick one.
You
One.
shouldn't be allowed to like bribe an Philharmonic by being like, here is $50 million, put my name on the fucking thing.
Yeah, the thing is that like what we're talking about now is Philharmonic Hall, the first iteration of Avery Fisher Hall, which I know it as Avery Fisher Hall because that's its name. They changed the name right when I was in the middle of grad school, so it's very annoying because I was writing a thesis. But like this is kind of like a Theseus's ship situation now at this point. Because this hall has just been completely gutted, and now it's being gutted for a third time. This is like truly a cursed project. Actually, the signs now point to it's going to be good again, which were good for the first time because the acoustic stuff that they're doing is like what they should do. Because we have like the science and stuff now. But anyways,
Finally,
like I guess we should start from the beginning.
Well, first,
truly a nightmare. Yeah. So. Yes, go ahead.
But first, we have to do the goddamn news. Okay.
It's the goddamn news.
It's the goddamn news. Washington Metro fucked up again.
Oh,
this train derailed 3 times, apparently.
Yes.
What?
Last week, the Blue Line, there was a train between, I think, Roslyn and Arlington Cemetery, derailed 3 times. The third time it didn't manage to derail itself. Which is
it's the little train that could, and then could, and then couldn't,
and then it couldn't,
and then really couldn't.
So right now, Metro has every single 7000 series train out of service because of axle defects that led to this derailment, as I understood it this morning, although I think there was just a press release saying it might have been something else. And that means today, Monday, October 18th, the Metro has the capability to run exactly 40 trains all day.
Is
Oh,
that a
no.
lot? Is that a lot? That sounds like a lot.
You know,
Well-
Alice, I see how you would think that, but no.
Bear in mind, the Glasgow subway is the smallest, tiny little model train thing in the world. So
It's true.
They're running like 30-minute headways today.
Art the fuck.
Uh,
That sucks.
Is this the red line? Is this the red line?
the blue line.
The blue line. Well, I think it's every line.
Oh wow! For once, it is not the red line.
Yes.
Red line just so hot right now.
Mm,
Yes.
Get it? Because it catches on fire all the fucking time.
That's why it's the red line.
Yeah, the red is for flames.
I am constantly impressed by how badly Metro can fuck something up.
Dude, every
Just-
day it feels like.
I used to like wish we had like a big Metro like system here in Philly, you know, because it goes more places. And I'm
yeah,
like,
and you
well,
don't
no.
wish that anymore.
No, I don't wish
No.
that anymore. I wish.
Well-
I'm glad we have a subway that works.
I just saw a New York Times article that a woman was sexually assaulted on an L train, and there were at least 8 passengers in the car, and none of them did anything.
Oh boy.
So your friendly reminder to intervene in that shit.
Mm.
It's gonna be fine. Worst case scenario, you get a stab wound.
Yeah, that's fine.
Yeah,
I'm
yeah.
not sure that's the approach I would take when
Yeah.
trying to like exhort people to intervene and stuff. But yes,
Yes. Don't.
worst case scenario,
don't be a
you
good
die, but still,
Yeah, it's worth it. It's worth it to die. Be an adult.
yeah, die with
Yeah.
honor.
Yeah, exactly.
This has been the Die with Honor podcast.
Yeah, and
Yes.
now we will all commit seppuku.
Nice.
That's right.
Speaking of dying with honor,
God, that's so loud.
Yeah, I know.
Colin Powell died of COVID.
Sort
died
of.
with COVID.
Yeah, he had
Yeah.
cancer. We should point
He
that
was
out.
also
Did have cancer.
87 years old.
Yeah, he
thought
was
he was
fully
84.
vaccinated, but there's been a lot of like, oh, he was fully vaccinated takes. And it's like, yes, but he also had cancer.
Yeah.
He was a war criminal who
Many times.
Yeah,
From Vietnam to Iraq all the way through to Iraq again.
yeah, we can only hope to have a record as horrific and bloody as Colin Powell.
Guy who did the cover up of the My Lai massacre.
Did he?
Yeah.
I actually didn't know that.
Yeah. That's
It's
how
like,
he like made his bones. That was like
Oh,
his
okay.
big deal in Vietnam. Was he helped cover that shit up.
What's
Big
the
oof.
what's the
Mhm.
equivalent of like throwing a coin into the fountain in Rome for like doing war crimes in Iraq to ensure you'll return to do more war crimes?
Yeah, and I mean, like, again, the sanest person in the Bush administration during the lead up to the war in Iraq too, which of course did not stop him from going to the UN with a little fake vial of anthrax to lie about it. So clearly his conscience didn't trouble him that much, and it killed like 2 million people.
You know, what's 2 million people between friends?
Yeah.
That's right.
Don't worry, it's all human life.
Anyway, rest in peace, bitch.
Yep.
I like rest in peace, bitch. That
I was gonna say rest in piss, but then I like stumbled and I said the nice thing instead.
oh well, look at you.
I know. I'm really disappointed
we
in
are
myself.
a good-hearted podcast.
That's right. That's right.
Hardcast. I'm sick.
It's got a sort of a storied legacy of public service, which also included things like invading Panama.
Winston.
Oh, Winston.
Sorry.
Hello, Winston.
Winston doesn't like the idea of invading Panama.
No, Winston.
Nor should he.
Good point.
Yeah, he
Good
doesn't.
point.
Well,
Winston. Gotta chill. Otherwise, you're gonna go in
Hate
the
to,
other room.
hate to see it. Hate to see Colin Powell die. But
Do you
know.
though?
No, not really. The thing
Yeah,
is, though, I
liar.
thought that like Kissinger would go first, but then I also
no, Kissinger
thought
never goes first. That was your
that's
first
the thing.
mistake.
No.
Yeah, that's the
No.
other thing, right? Because Kissinger is never gonna die. I figured if you just do enough evil shit in the service of the State Department, it like insulates all of your vital organs from your many diseases, and you just don't die. So clearly, Colin Powell should have started like a third or fourth war.
I mean, you're already playing with house money, right?
Kissinger is just, he did enough war
Oh my
crimes that he's
God.
going to sort of evolve into a war crimes mentat from Dune.
Yeah.
You know?
Exactly. Colin Powell is never going to become the front of a sandworm now, and
No.
that's a shame.
That's a shame. It's a smirch on his legacy. which, as we know, was previously untainted and good.
That's right. That's right.
Anyway, that was the goddamn news. Okay. We're going to start with a question, as usual.
Oh, God.
What is acoustics?
It's a thing that you use in Winamp, which, incidentally, thank you for the huge hit of nostalgia there.
Really whips the llama's ass.
Downloading Winamp skins at 3 a.m. What you doing?
No, I'm not doing Socratic method today. I'm actually throwing this to Kate.
Kate, our fearless leader.
What is acoustics?
It's when the sound waves.
Yes. Acoustics is the science of sound. It includes a number of fields, including physics, like physical acoustics, which is, sound waves, that kind of thing, how sound works. Like in the abstract, like mathematically, that kind of thing. It includes like all kinds of fields, like geoacoustics, which is basically mostly used for drilling for oil. Bioacoustics, which is used for like hearing bats talk and stuff, which is very cool. One of the cooler fields in acoustics. See, these are all very hard sciences, right? And then we've got architectural acoustics, which is a science in the same way that architecture is a science, which is to say it's not. There is science behind architectural acoustics, and there's engineering. You can be an acoustical engineer, and that means also doing things like making speakers, which I used to do at a company when I was an intern back in the day. And like making recordings, like all kinds of applied acoustics is what we would say. But like architectural acoustics is funny because, to give you an example of where the science is, we still need a supercomputer at Rensselaer to model visually sound as a wave in a room, in a simple cube, actually. To do that visual modeling. So if anyone tells you that like we can model and we will know what a room will sound like before it's built, they're lying. The truth of the matter is that we can make very educated guesses about how a room will sound. And like the more complex the room, the less predictable it is. This is the case with like the Philharmonic, for example, which is very famous, very expensive, and is a really, really weird room because they put so much diffusion in there to break up sound that like certain things just sound weird in there. Whether or not people will like it, 50 years from now, we'll have to see. Sometimes people like a hall when it opens and think it's crap 50 years from now. It takes about 50 years for a hall's reputation to really be solidified. But sometimes there's always been these stories of people trusting the science too much and to the point where bad things happen. And to be fair, like the science has come a long way, but most of that science isn't modeling so much as it is measurement. We've become really good at taking microphones and speakers into concert halls and being able to measure and like to some extent model how sound works in a space. However, and so for this reason, when acousticians do a really big concert hall project, for example, they'll do things like build like a 1:4 scale model or something, like a scale model that is like the size of a small room with like, and then they'll run measurements in that model. That's like one of the safest ways to model how a room will sound, because the truth of the matter is that the computer modeling and things like that, it just isn't there. And it won't be there probably for several years. So we can visually model existing rooms, and we're really good at measuring them, and we've really come a long way in understanding how sound works in rooms, not only like architecturally, but like, things like psychoacoustically, like how things like
psychoacoustically is when you play the scary like knife noises from the movie.
You just play the Psycho soundtrack at full blast.
But like the role that like the human ear plays in acoustics, and also the auditory nerve. So it's a really interesting field. But like a lot of science, a lot of applied science, like architectural acoustics is kind of mostly design, and the science bit of it is there's engineering, and it's like very serious engineering. Like I don't want to like give the impression that it's not. But it's not engineering in the way that like people like engineer like jet engines or something. Like there's a lot of things that are difficult to predict and model and measure. And so the truth of the matter is that we still won't know what a room will sound like until that room is built. And there's still, which is why the field relies so heavily on precedent. Things that have worked, like, will continue to work. Which is why for the last, like, 10 years, like, every major concert hall that's been built has been built sort of in the style of, like, Walt Disney Concert Hall by Frank Gehry in 2003. That was finished in 2003. It's really a 90s concert hall. But it's really that vineyard style hall, because we know that works. It produces, like, really nice architecture. It's, like, a satisfying, like, acoustic environment. People feel, like, enveloped by the sound. Like, this, we've been studying how vineyard style halls or semi-vineyard style halls work since the 60s. And so we can produce relatively accurately, like, a hall that will sound good. But when you start to experiment, see, this is a catch-22, right? Like, when you want to experiment and you want to do something different, it comes with the risk of things going wrong. And so, but like, this brings us to Philharmonic Hall. Like, Philharmonic Hall was, like, a massive, embarrassing failure for the science of acoustics. Like, it's probably its biggest failure in the history of its time, since it's not an old field. Acoustics, like, there have been, like, things like, you know, like organ builders and stuff in, like, medieval ages or whatever, but, like, the actual science of architectural acoustics didn't exist until the beginning of the 20th century with the work of Harvard physicist Wallace Sabin. And Wallace Sabin's a really interesting guy because he basically was like an adjunct professor who, like, got assigned, like, the shittiest room imaginable to, like, do a lecture in. And he was, like, he was so pissed at this room, which was, like, an art gallery at Harvard, was so shitty that, like, he decided to invent an entirely new field of science to fix it.
I mean, that's the best possible reason to do that. Yeah.
Yeah, his working conditions were bad, and so he was like, you know what, we got to figure this out. So he went across the street to, like, some church, and brought back a bunch of cushions from the pews, and he would, like, basically take, like, these crude measurements of, like, what would happen, like, whenever he added a new cushion to like, the like, delay or the reverberation of the sound of an impulse, which in this case was him blowing through a tube or him blowing through an organ pipe. And so it's so funny because, like, he just, like, created the math behind what's known as, like, the reverberation equation, or the Sabin equation for reverberation time. And by doing that, by quantifying that, he basically founded the beginning of architectural acoustics. But it's because his room sucked. Like, he was really just like, if his labor conditions were better, someone else would have done it, and it wouldn't have been as good of a story. But anyways, Philharmonic Hall, really fascinating. Let's get to it. So this is a great story because it also touches on, like, all the other bad things that were happening with modernism and, like, urban renewal and all that.
Well, I thought a fun place to start would be, you know, sort of some of the history of architectural acoustics before there was any science behind it. You know, just this famous this quote here from Charles Garnier, who did, you know, the Paris Opera. He said, "I gave myself pains to master this bizarre science of acoustics, but nowhere did I find a positive rule to guide me. On the contrary, nothing but contradictory statements. I must explain that I adopted no principle, that my plan has been based on no theory, and I leave success or failure to chance alone."
Hell yes, dude.
Like an acrobat who closes his eyes and clings to the ropes of an ascending balloon.
Fuck around and apparently find out.
Yeah.
Fuck.
And that's
so
that's the theory behind the main auditorium at the Paris Opera. Is there
People
is no
seem
theory.
to like it, I guess.
Fuck it, we'll do it live.
I like that. I appreciate that.
Yeah, truly. It's funny because opera is interesting because opera houses were shaped architecturally more by, like, social strata than they were acoustics. Like, it was all about, like, the rich people being seen and, like, the poor's not being seen. So that had, like, architectural consequences. And that's always been the case throughout the history of performing arts spaces. Like, for example, like, before when like, for example, when classical music was only a figment of the aristocracy, and you had, like, court composers and all of this, like, music rooms were designed for, like, small numbers of people, and, like, were really like social institutions more than they were places for like this. It had to sound good. And up until like the 19th century, when people listened to classical music, they were also just like walking around, like talking, fucking off, basically, faffing about. And like the idea of like the silent reverent concert hall is like actually a really bourgeois idea that came from listening practices in the 19th century when the public concert became a thing. And like you had the like the emergence of like the bourgeoisie and bourgeois culture. And so like the bourgeoisie were often finding things that made them look like they were like aristocratic. And so things like stratified seating in public concert halls based on concert ticket prices. Things like the obsession with silence and like with like this kind of like etiquette of the concert hall, which like actual aristocrats like never really cared about. It's actually just like bourgeois people and their obsession with quiet. And yeah, it's a really, all of like what we know about like classical music concert going culture was basically invented by like upper middle class people in the 19th century. And so because of this, like because of all of these different social factors, concert hall design was really kind of based on the current architectural practices of the time, which were neoclassical in style. So like temple-like buildings, like for example, the Musikverein in Vienna, or any kind of 19th century concert hall, the Concertgebouw in Amsterdam. These are all very neoclassical, high Romantic era neoclassical buildings. And it just so happened actually that the combined taste for things that looked like temples and the current taste for like a bunch of like overdone weepy architectural ornament from like all different periods of like the classical era, mostly Greek, but some Roman, and also like the predilection for stratified seating, so that rich people could show off, and also the current practices of building ventilation, which required clerestory windows at the highest level of the concert hall so they can like let out all like the farts and smoke and stuff. All of these things combined accidentally made a really fucking good concert hall, actually. Like the 19th century shoebox style concert halls are some of the best in the world. And they basically did it not because of like the science of architectural acoustics, which didn't exist yet, but because of this combination of like social factors, architectural factors, like and engineering factors.
So what you're saying is so the like sort of 19th century class system is scientifically the best way to organize a concert hall by accident.
Yes.
Yeah. Exactly. That was exactly kind of how it happened. But it's funny because like the ventilation stuff, because they had gas lamps at the time. That was actually very important too, and why concert halls sound so well. It's really fascinating to me, because like if they didn't have that ventilation at the top, that like they have a bunch of basically empty space above the highest seated listener that like that allowed like, because the heat from the chandeliers was really hot, and so no one would want to sit up there. Like you had to like have these windows that you could open to ventilate the space, and they had to be certifiably big enough to do that. What it ended up doing was creating like this, like what we call warmth in a concert hall. Because you have space above the highest seated listener, it creates spaciousness, this sensation of being enveloped in sound. Like which we usually like like warmth actually has more to do with like bass response, but like it as like a vibe, I guess, less than like a technical term. That spaciousness is what makes those concert halls so great, because it's just actually the right amount of people in the hall, the right amount of spaciousness, the right use of materials in a way that makes it like reverberant and like really like lovely, but not like too wet, not too echoey. So it's actually really fascinating to me personally how like a bunch of shit just came together in a way that really worked. I think it's a really great metaphor for the field as a whole.
Asking if my concert hall is creepy or wet.
Yeah, so true. So true about wet. Not a great word. But like it is like as opposed to dry, which is like not reverberant at all.
Wet.
Yeah, our concert halls were too wet, yes.
It's very moist.
Yeah. Ben Shapiro's wife.
No.
Yeah, this concert hall is just dripping.
Oh, I'm pointy as hell.
It is dripping.
Hey, Justin, how do you get to Carnegie Hall?
How do you get to Carnegie?
Practice.
Oh,
One day we'll play Carnegie Hall and they'll boo us off stage.
Yeah, we'll do the Boston Molasses Flood at Carnegie Hall.
So, Yankees suck, right? As I'm being pelted with cans.
they're probably more into like some kind of other. What you go up there and do is shit talk squash or something.
Yeah, you heard about racquetball?
I say Columbia is the 7th best school in the Ivy League 10,000 times until I'm escorted off stage with one of those giant hooks.
That's funny.
Thank you.
All right.
I'm dying.
Yeah, try not to go out like Colin Powell.
Yeah. Well, this is sort of where our story starts, right? It's old-fashioned, big auditorium, good acoustics. There's the home of the New York City Philharmonic, Philharmonic Orchestra. And the 50s, everyone's like, this is an old-fashioned thing. And its owner wanted to redevelop it, so they didn't renew the lease of the Philharmonic, right?
What is a Philharmonic anyway?
It's just a symphony.
Harmony.
Orchestra.
They love harmony.
Orchestra.
It's an orchestra that loves harmony. Okay, gotcha.
So true. Yeah. So Carnegie Hall, actually, like acoustically speaking, is not that great. Basically, Sabin actually was a really great acoustician, even though he was the first acoustician. And he knew he worked, for example, on Boston Symphony Hall, which is one of the greatest symphony halls ever. And because he understood, like, not completely, but like to some extent, like the role that like designing it like a shoebox style hall was really like a good idea. And like he was like very intent on trying to figure out like why, but he knew based on precedent that style of hall worked. But at the same time, like Sabin got drafted into World War I and got shot and died at the age of 30. So the world of acoustics changed like quite a bit after that. Yeah. So he was like kind of like a bit of a hero in acoustics, because he was actually just right about acoustics before. But anyways, like, so people took his science and decided to like apply it in kind of like the first early crude ways. And so like, again, like you have a modern, this is again a social change. You have differences in like the concert going public. More and more people, not just bourgeois people, were going to concerts at the beginning of the 20th century. And so you had to the things like sightlines became way more important than and selling tickets than like acoustics or whatever. And then also like changes in architecture. The Beaux-Arts style was more conducive to like an auditorium of the size. Anyways, it's the same pattern that happens over and over again. But the truth is that the New York Philharmonic had like kind of outgrown Carnegie Hall. And they wanted something new, and it just so happens that like urban renewal was happening.
Oh yeah.
And they could just let's go into that.
Yeah. So this is a fun one, because we're looking at
what did they bulldoze?
The failure, the best laid plans of federal housing legislation happened here. In 1937, there was the Wagner-Steagall Act, right? And provides federal subsidies to housing authorities to replace substandard housing with new public housing. There's a specific stipulation in there that you replace it one for one. You can't actually build more housing than existed there before. You got to demolish the build, because they thought it would adversely affect the housing market if you built lots of new public housing, right? For the better. Yeah, exactly. For the better, obviously. But this is built with the sympathy. This legislation has lots of sympathies for landlords, and then what exactly is substandard housing? Well, that's left as an exercise to the housing authority. Now this power is expanded in 1949 with Taft, Ellender, Wagner, right? This provides cities with a whole big pot of cash for something called slum clearance under Title I, right? Which basically to fund any project that replaces substandard housing with anything, right?
Like a concert hall.
Like a concert hall, could be a park, could even be middle income or even luxury housing. There's Title III of that same act authorized a bunch of funding for public housing, but a lot of planners and politicians had other ideas, right?
Mm.
Mhm.
And one of those guys was, of course, Robert Moses.
Friend of the show.
A friend of the show, Robert Moses. Still won't come on for some reason. I don't know.
Just exhume his corpse and be like, Robert, tell me about the bridges.
We're doing a cadaver synod, but with in podcast form.
It's about time. Had it coming.
Yeah. So he's famous for, the roads and the highways and the bridges. He was also chairman of the mayor's committee on slum clearance, and he used his Title I funds extensively for all kinds of things which were not low-income housing, right? A lot of times they would just go in, you'd condemn houses and tenements, you'd demolish them, then you'd hand off the land to private developers to build modern, apartment towers, right? And determining what was a slum was highly racialized, and the program was just an engine of mass displacement and infliction of misery, right?
Hmm.
And in the early 50s, when this program was really in full swing, Moses was struck by a series of coincidences, right? Fordham University wanted a new campus. Metropolitan Opera thought it had inadequate facilities.
An ice cream truck driving down outside my window. I don't know if my microphone's going to pick that up, but if so, please enjoy.
I'm getting a little bit of ice cream truck, yeah.
I would go for some ice cream right now. It wouldn't help me, but yeah.
So yeah, the Metropolitan Opera had inadequate facilities. The Philharmonic was being kicked out of Carnegie Hall, which they kind of wanted to leave anyway. And the cogs started turning in Moses's head, and he realized the solution here was to build an incredible new cultural center with facilities for the opera, the Philharmonic, a new Fordham campus, and other cultural facilities, right? Including the LaGuardia High School for the Performing Arts, relocated Juilliard School, a new home for the New York Ballet, and a whole bunch of other cultural accoutrements, right? And also 4,400 apartments, and 400 of those apartments would actually be low income. Incredible, right?
I mean, God, it's so grim that it's like better than today's.
Yeah. Well, hold on a second. Now, this plan was set in motion in 1957. It was going to be located in a neighborhood called San Juan Hill, right? John D. Rockefeller III started fundraising for the whole shebang, and soon it was clear the Lincoln Center was happening.
Yeah.
Here it is in 1924-ish, San Juan Hill, which also was also known as Lincoln Square at the time. The people who lived there called it San Juan Hill, but Lincoln Square was the official name of the neighborhood.
Out of curiosity, what was the sort of like a demographic of San Juan Hill?
I'm glad you asked. It was New York City's most heavily populated African-American community.
Of course,
also a lot of Caribbean Americans there, right?
It's crazy how this always seems to happen along racial lines. Surely just a coincidence.
Just a bunch of weird coincidences.
Just a bunch of weird coincidences.
You can see you got Columbus Circle down here. Here's Central Park. You got the New York Central West Side Yards over here. This is now a bunch of Trump towers.
Right.
Although I think they took the Trump name off most of them. Right here, this area that's been pre-highlighted in red, this is where the Lincoln Center was going to go. But in addition to that, they demolished several blocks down here for Fordham. They demolished some stuff over here for housing. I think all the way up to here was various other crap, right? So they took out a lot. And so the city just condemns this whole neighborhood with the exception of one building, which they decided to purchase for well above market price.
That's funny how that works, too.
Because it was owned by Robert F. Kennedy.
Oh, okay.
LMAO, I didn't actually know about that part.
So now for the cultural center and the 4,400 apartments, 7,700 people and 800 businesses were displaced. Most of them wound up moving to Harlem, but they did have the right to compete over the 400 low-income apartments.
Oh, I'm sure that was conducted in a perfectly sort of orderly way.
Oh yeah, I don't think anyone really moved back into the project area. There's no point, especially since not only were you displaced, but the place you worked was displaced. So yeah, this is your standard urban renewal here.
Well, it's renewed.
It's renewed.
Okay, can I also add one little thing?
Oh yeah,
which is that there's also a Cold War element to this, where there was like lots of internal talks amongst like Rockefeller and donors about like creating like a palace for music to show like the Soviet Union that America was really good and cared about the arts. And it's very funny to me that like they did this by like displacing like the working class, which like I'm sure the Soviet Union would have taken notice of.
Well, it was interesting because
just
they're
an
actually
L
like
all the way around.
it's big L. The L stands for Lincoln.
Yes.
So they were big, you know, they demolished all these tenements, right? There's big protests about this, actually. You can see folks protesting here, holding signs like shelter before culture, you know, humane progress means decent relocation, you know, $47.50 a room, progress for whom? That's an interesting one.
And grammatical, too.
Yes. You know, and they a bunch of groups file lawsuits to get the project stopped, you know, and these are treated with contempt and, you know, thrown out. I mean, Title I slum clearance means you can do anything, right? And they start construction on what was to be called Philharmonic Hall, right? And being an auditorium, it required some special considerations during construction. They had a special architect, Max Abramovitz, right? And a special consulting firm that did acoustics, Bolt, Baranek, and Newman, which apparently is now part of Raytheon.
Everything eventually is just part of Raytheon.
Funny how that works.
They have the second oldest extant domain name, bbn.com, registered April 24th, 1985.
Thank you, Ross.
Yes, it's a fun fact.
Yes.
That actually is a fun fact.
There's lots of fun facts about Bolt Baranek. Yeah.
Everything's a fun fact when it comes back to Raytheon.
This is what I said, that there's... So Bolt Baranek or Newman was one of the first modern acoustics firms. And so it's funny, the reason why they got in, first of all, they got into the internet really early. And second of all, like the reason why they became Raytheon is because basically Bolt Baranek and Newman financed their like high culture stuff for acoustics by also doing acoustical work, such as like, you know, developing measurement standards for noise, like working with aircraft, all kinds of other things that helped fund the war machine.
Lots of jet age stuff.
Make it more efficient. This was very much like General Dynamics vibes, you know what I mean? But like the cultural stuff they did was almost like kind of on the side, but it was like the big project of Leo Baranek, who was the second B in BBN. Bolt and Newman were more into the other stuff. Anyways, but before like all of the Cold War, like I said, there's always a Cold War angle, but Leo Baranek is a fascinating guy. He died like my second year of grad school, so I never got to talk to him, which is truly devastating. But he is basically considered the father of like modernist acoustics, one would say. But he was also a great historian of concert halls. And he was very intent on, and my own work in acoustics as an academic follows in this tradition pretty much almost exactly. He's very big on going around the world and cataloging and measuring and understanding different concert halls. His first book, Music, Acoustics, and Architecture, was published in 1962. And it basically features like about 100 concert halls that like he went around and did like acoustic measurements in and studied and like provides like the plans and sections and like the history. It's actually, all of his books are really lovely. There's three editions of this book. And the last one I think was published in like 2004, but like don't quote me on that. But they're all really good. Very important in my own research, very important in the history of architectural acoustics, because kind of without Leo Baranek, like we wouldn't have nearly as much of the history of the field. But because he went around and studied why concert halls work or why he thought they worked, like I remind you again that like the science of acoustics, like this is before the age of the computer. This is like when we were basically using like field recording equipment to do measurements where you would fire off a shotgun in a hall or like pop a balloon and like have you would fire a shotgun off in a hall and measure record it and measure the amount of time it took for the sound to dissipate. This is how we did.
Why don't you still do that?
To did not know that Frank Furness was the first acoustician in his office.
The reason is the reason is because we're not allowed to travel with pistols anymore. Also, we developed more complex, like standard tests for measuring reverberation time more accurately. But this was kind of like a crude operation, and yet because of like what was considered at the time to be like modern science, like Beranek really thought he knew everything about concert halls, and he thought he knew what makes a really good concert hall. But the thing is like he didn't know everything, not even nearly. So it's really he devised basically this comprehensive plan, believing that like his careful scientific calibrations and whatnot would produce a great concert hall worthy of like Lincoln Center's ambitious project. It was really kind of a surgical top-down approach that's really no different from like technocratic planning Moses employed with some clearance. But it was, it's very interesting that, like, basically Beranek and his colleagues, who at the time were Russell Johnson and Theodore Schwartz and B.G. Waters, all of whom became successful independent acousticians in their own right, they believed that careful placement of certain architectural and technical elements based on, like, the latest concepts in acoustics could help mitigate the acoustical problems in the modern concert hall. The thing is the Philharmonic Society really wanted to have a concert hall that sounded like a 19th century shoebox, but they wanted it within the modernist architectural sensibility of, like, the architecture of Max Abramovitz, and, of course, like, again, more integration stuff with, like, modern urban planning. So Beranek originally conceived Philharmonic Hall to take on the shoebox shape of its inspiration, which was Boston Symphony Hall. But he had to fit this shape into like a modernist building, and this ended up contributing to its downfall. First of all, like it was known at the time, thanks to the work of Beranek himself, that the success of the 19th century shoebox hall was partially attributable to the varying decorative architectural embellishments, which acted like to diffuse sound and break it up in a way that was like satisfying and created ambiance and warmth and whatever. However, like Beranek himself laments in his reflection on Philharmonic Hall after 1 year of its use, quote, "Contemporary architectural taste tends towards simplicity and deliberately avoids the elaborative decorative elements that provide multiple diffusing surfaces in the older halls. The extensive, quote, contouring of the older halls also acted to break up any large flat surfaces that might create echoes. In addition, the 19th century shoebox halls had like high ceilings to provide a suitably long reverberation time, meaning it sounds spacious and nice. However, Philharmonic Hall, which was, Max Abramovitz, being a modernist building, kept a really low stratified profile that was not tall enough to provide this necessary ceiling height, like I talked about before.
Yeah, it should have been more bourgeois.
This is like the biggest problem.
You should have been more bourgeois.
Totally got to be more bougie. But no, they should have used gas lamps, and then they would have had to ventilate the space, and then they would have had the necessary ceiling height. But alas, they had electricity now.
Girl boss.
Yes.
Girl boss, exactly. So Beranek had to basically mitigate these problems with a variety of solutions, some of which were like increasingly crackpot, including, so they tried first of all to do like a reflecting array of overhead ceiling panels, which I think you can see in the pictures.
Oh, I got that later
in order
on
to send
in the slides,
what they call like early reflections to the center of the main floor. But unfortunately, the gaps between these panels, because they had to be pretty and modernist, were too wide, and therefore their ability to actually reflect sound was greatly diminished. And there's also like they had this weird stage wall that featured, quote, an acoustically transparent slatted structure, end quote, that aimed to hide unsightly ventilation outlets. Again, modernism. It's air conditioned.
Yeah.
Behind which was a reflective wall. All of these were solutions to the problems with the architectural concept, rather than like Beranek and his colleagues' original intent for a good concert hall. And these corrections were not enough, for the hall was like a massive failure. Despite attempts at improvement, it was ultimately gutted and replaced with Avery Fisher Hall in 1976. But the thing is that like the greed of developers and elites who wanted to gain like monetary cultural capital at the expense of 14 blocks where people lived and worked, combined with like an absolutely dogmatic architectural and urbanist programming that allowed for no flexibility for even like the actual program of what it was supposed to be doing. That's really what kind of sealed Philharmonic Hall's fate. Oh yeah, this is like really funny. Okay, we get to the funniest part actually, which like is called the seat dip effect incident.
Oh no!
Oh boy.
So yeah. So
did someone say
the
dip?
elite sponsors?
Yeah,
that's right. We're getting dipped. The elite sponsors of Philharmonic Hall wanted to maximize seat count in order to maximize the amount of profit for concert. Because again, this is like capitalist bullshit.
Oh, hold on, Kate.
This
You're
being
getting
an
ahead
elite
of me here
luxury
because
hall,
I got a whole slide on this too.
Okay. I'll stop.
Yeah. So, I mean, Baranek, had done a number of auditorium projects, right? I looked over some of the Philharmonic archives. I saw like the what's it like? He came up with 18 properties of an auditorium after the big survey you mentioned. Some of them seem to be quantitative. Some of them are qualitative. I had some difficulty figuring them out. I don't know what I'm talking about. But they were very...
You're stuck with Charles Garnier. Just being
exactly.
like, whatever feels right.
Stay loose,
But there were some issues with the actual putting together of the building, right? Which is why we need to return to the slide I had the last time Kate was on, way back in episode 4.
It's been a while. It's been a minute.
How the building is designed and built.
A guy takes a poop in a field. Things go downhill from there.
So, we got the client. In this case, it's a committee of people, who want the building. And they tell the architect, in this case, Max Abramovitz, like, okay, here's a building. This is what we want. This is our idea. And then the architect says, what the hell are these guys thinking as to go about turning their vague idea into a workable building? There's some back and forth here. The architect sends their drawing to the engineers, in this case, including an acoustics guy. Once again, these engineers go through the architect's drawing set and says, what the hell are these people doing? They start fighting with each other and the architect about what goes where, what's practical. There's more back and forth here. The HVAC guy roots a duct straight through an I-beam. There's conflicts with the plumbing, right? So on and so forth, right? But eventually they finish fighting with each other. And, someone puts a PE stamp on there, right? Which means someone is criminally liable if something goes wrong. There's different stamps. In Jersey, it's a crimper. And these are sent out for permitting. The drawings are sent out for permitting, and the inspectors are not engineers. In a lot of places, the stamp is there. Nothing goes wrong. We get to the next step quickly. The contractors take the drawing and say, fucking hell, these chuckle fucks. And they send the drawings out to some contract or subcontractors who look at those drawings and say, what the fuck and Jesus H. Christ, right? They make modifications to the drawings, send back shop drawings showing what they can build and what they intend to build. Architects and engineers sign off or say, no, you dumb idiot, you have to do it this way. There's more back and forth here. And then, you have the labor who's actually building the damn building, and they're constantly complaining about all the boneheaded decisions made above them. And of course, they know the most about building, but they're least able to make design changes since you got to go way up the chain of command, right? And the architect comes back and does the as-built drawings, which I've complained about previously. And the client's been meddling the whole time in this, and the architect's been trying to herd all these cats the whole time, right? So in summary, it's a goddamn miracle anything gets built. And government contracting is even worse. Now, in this case, we're doing quasi-government contracting, right? So for the Lincoln Center, rather than being one guy who wanted the building, there's a building committee, right? Which was composed of all kinds of stakeholders in the project. So you had a real estate guy, you had a guy from the Philharmonic Orchestra, you had an opera guy, you had politicians. And they may or may not know anything about buildings or auditoriums. And the building committee was subject to its own whims and desires. And so Abramovitz tried to coordinate everything through his office.
Did this work?
No.
Oh.
I think one thing which was a big mistake is they published the design in the New York Times before they built the building.
Yeah.
Yeah, and they get all the people who read the New York Times gets to have an opinion.
And it was published as a 2,400 seat auditorium, which was shockingly less than the 2,760 seat Carnegie Hall, right? So a bunch of newspapers, especially the New York Herald Tribune, right, which is the newspaper Marx wrote for, decided.
Also appears in Breathless.
Yes. They decided to take on the cause of making the auditorium bigger. And the building committee listened and told Abramovich to cram some more seats in. And it got bigger.
Just put them in there. Just put them in there.
Just put them in there. It got to 2,738 seats, and it got fatter and wider.
Same.
And it got longer.
Yeah, mood.
Same.
I'm a grower, not a shower. But.
Yeah. And Baranek said, listen, this is going to fuck up the acoustics. And that got as far as Abramovich's office and didn't get to the building committee. He wasn't able to raise his objections to the people who made the decisions.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. It was truly... This is like acoustics is like one of those things that's like always valued engineered. Even in like except for in concert halls, but even in concert halls, it happens. It's like so funny to me. But
listen, you don't go to a concert hall
great
to hear music good.
Well, they did a couple other changes without really consulting Baranek here, right? Which is the acoustic clouds were made narrower. You can see in this chart down here.
Yep.
Which resulted in, according to modeling, the original proposed ones would you'd have a better bass in the auditorium with the original ones versus the new ones. You can sort of see in this chart. I'm a dumb idiot here. I don't know why.
Yeah. Go ahead.
They really mess with these. They wound up doing a safety alteration to them because they were supposed to be individually adjustable, right? But someone said that's unsafe. What if there's an earthquake? They'll whack into each other. So they were all welded together.
Make it more rigid. Yes.
So you couldn't really adjust them individually anymore.
Now we're talking.
I don't know if
Congratulations, Alice. This must be
I'm having a great
day
time.
for you. Yes.
Yeah. It's a red letter day.
There we go. That's the phrase I wanted. Again, I am on the cusp of death. So
there's a picture of the acoustic clouds in the next slide, so everyone can see what we're talking about.
Take me now, Lord.
Yeah. Then the contractor who did the welding misread the shop drawings and
good.
Yeah,
nice.
and welded them together 6 feet too low, or just the front row.
Oh, you wanted a concert hall? What I've delivered you is a perfectly welded solid cube. It's like a cavity magnetron you have to fit a Philharmonic into.
I think some acoustic surfaces in the building were value engineered out, like panels on the walls.
Good.
These are replaced by painting the wall blue.
Oh, value hack.
Yeah.
This one weird trick.
There was some major value engineering going on here, it seems.
Nothing says suck it Soviet Union like value engineering.
I think the slope of the balconies was also increased.
Yeah. For better sight lines. Yeah, it's really great actually. So like it's so funny. Yeah, let me find like this. Okay, so here's what happened. Here's what happened too. Okay, we get into like the seat dip thing. They had because like this was like an elite and luxury hall, it was demanded that the seats are both spacious and comfortable as well. Think Cadillac, not Prius here.
Right.
And so they also like removed sidewall ornament and increased seating capacity, which had to be done without lengthening the hall, so to conform to its sleek architectural profile. And so like this also made the hall like prone to a weird kind of echo, and like there was it was like extremely absorbent. And so like there was like it was basically like not reverberant. So like there was a weird echo, there was like little echo, little reverberation, but what was there was weird. And
yeah, we've had wet and now we have creepy.
Yeah, but there's other things like even though like it was like a total screw up. And again, just because they weren't allowed to change anything in the profile of the hall. But at the same time, like, a lot of the techniques, this is where we get to the but part. Like, as you can see, like, this was a disaster. Like, on the opening night, like, musicians couldn't hear themselves. Like, it became very clear, very, like, that. And Baranek, he just, like, kept fiddling with it. Like, kept adding things, kept changing things. Because it was all just, like, all they needed to do was raise the ceiling and make the hall narrower. And, like, they couldn't do that. And
yes,
so
the
all that
Kanye
he
approach.
did was just, like, he tried everything. He tried everything. And like, he just threw thing after thing after thing at it. And it became very clear before the opening night that, like, oh, shit. You know?
Oh, fuck.
Like, and then the opening night was, like, a disaster. The hall was, like, unlistenable. It was so bad that it couldn't even last for a few years before they were like, we have to just gut the whole thing. It's a complete wash job. Like, I mean, this was, like, basically, like, what this said was that, like, the science of acoustics is not there yet. It just isn't. But that's one part of the problem, is that, like, they didn't know exactly quite how to fix these things because, like, they still didn't quite understand, like, why things worked to begin with. They had basic, like, crude knowledge of it based on, like, what the technology was available at the time. But, like, it's in a lot of ways, though, like, Baranek and his colleagues were really victims of a broader problem, which is that, like, they wanted this to make money. They wanted it to look a certain way to increase rents and real estate values because you have this big architect involved. Like, they were really kind of victims of capitalism, even though, like, you know, they've got a lot of money from it. And this really ran Baranek himself out of acoustics. And he spent all of his time basically being on the payroll doing his, like, weird acoustic surveys and helping with research. But he never designed, he designed a couple more concert halls, I think. But he was disgraced, basically. And it kind of, like, wasn't his fault. And yet, at the same time, like, this is the but part. Many of the techniques that they employed in the construction of Philharmonic Hall were really new. And, like, without experimentation, like, the field would never, ever move forward. We would just have shoebox halls forever. And the thing is like, they had really massive impacts on Baranek's colleagues, like Schultz and Russell, who would both go on to form their own acoustics firms after a schism that we won't talk about. But the concept of, like, an overhead canopy as a reflector, and the later another attempted fix, employment of retractable curtains on stage to make the hall more flexible for use as a theater for speaking events, would stay with, like, Russell Johnson, who became, like, highly involved in the development of, like, both A, massive canopies, and B, adjustable acoustics throughout his entire career, which I think is very fascinating. If I went back to school, I would definitely, like, that would be my research would be on Russell Johnson. But anyways,
opening night, they had done, you know, months of tuning unsuccessfully in this theater. And then finally, the moment of truth arrived, Sunday, September 23rd, 1962, right? And no one could be fully sure how the auditorium sounded until there was an audience in there. And as Kate said, it was bad. Really, really bad. The journalists panned the hall, but the real kicker was that the conductors agreed. It's shit. Leonard Bernstein said, or this is from meeting minutes from the Philharmonic Orchestra. Mr. Bernstein has said, as he listens in the auditorium, the hall has an uninteresting sound except for the horns and clarinets. At no time does he feel he is surrounded by music. He said the general effect is like hearing music written on a blackboard, a tableau effort. He said there is no presence or warmth. Right? He said there's uninteresting sound in without a sense of being surrounded by sound. There's a lack of strength in low-pitched instruments between A and E, better in the higher seats than in the stalls, domination of horns and woodwinds, edgy high frequencies like they were amplified, dependence on musicians, on risers, or in certain positions on stage is not acceptable, and disappointed it's impossible to speak to the musicians without strain, no better than in Carnegie Hall, right?
Damn, dude.
Yeah.
That's rough.
Ripped.
It's bad.
Yeah.
Bad, folks.
So they tried tweaks.
Lots of tweaks.
Lots of tweaks.
The thing is, here's the thing about acoustics. This is like truly, there's like a fundamental rule of acoustics I learned in grad school, which is like, first of all, avoid the bad. Second, design the good. And like, honestly, if you can't avoid the bad to begin with, it's in like what we call like the DNA of the hall. There's nothing you can do, nothing you can add that's going to fix it in a way that gutting it isn't. And so like it's really kind of a high stakes thing. And it's so like there's nothing, no surface level thing that they could do to this hall that was going to fix all of the problems in it. They basically had to like gut it. And yet at the same time, like, and I'll talk about the renovation. I think we get to Avery Fisher Hall in a little bit. But at the same time, like, the thing is that like for example, like this hall also did something that was very important, like extremely important for the development of acoustics at mid-century. It combined a shoebox hall with like rear walls were splayed like a fan-shaped hall. And he really like this. So Theodore Schultz, who was like another acoustician, whose halls in the 1980s, like including like the halls in Baltimore and Toronto, for example, like he really was obsessed with this idea that like the fan was the most economical concert hall, but it sounded like shit. And the shoebox hall was the best sounding concert hall. And he like truly believed that there was some way to reconcile these differences. And this reconciliation with economy and acoustics is what would dominate the development of concert hall, of concert halls like in the 60s and 70s, which is the period that I studied. And it was fascinating because like they really did a bunch of weird shit with the form of concert halls. Like it was like the most experimental age in the entire history of the field. And we came away with like some really fascinating and great knowledge about it that was necessary for concert halls to be better. And the thing is like, yeah, when I was at like covering cycling at the Vuelta, there was like a line like that Roglic, the Slovenian cyclist who won the Vuelta, said to press after he like won a stage by like doing some like mental shit, was like, he was like, yeah, no risk, no glory. And that's truly like the thing about acoustics is like no risk, no glory. But man, sometimes if you take the risks, you truly do not get the glory. But it's fascinating to me, like, like this. So many things were learned from the failures of Philharmonic Hall that it actually, despite being a huge piece of shit, improved the field massively and improved the field's understanding of problems massively. Because like Baranek, while he was figuring it out, right, while he was like doing his best, still managed to like get a lot of information and data about like what things were and weren't working, and all that stuff would prove to become useful in the future of the field. So, and it avoided them for like making the same mistakes essentially. But yeah, it was a real shit show. So what happened after, right? Basically the orchestra and the people involved said like, God, this is unusable. And they just like fired everyone involved. Which, to be fair, okay. But then it became clear, and there's like a really great New Yorker article about this. Go ahead. One
thing I thought was kind of funny is that when they, Baranek suggested some solutions, and they eventually, they fired Baranek. The building committee retained some outside experts to make recommendations, and this committee of this experts committee became known as the acoustical panel.
Yes, which is funny. Yes.
And I think Heinrich Kielhose is like the main guy on this, and he decided, the way to go is to just cover everything in wood, right?
Yes.
Yeah, be more trad about it.
They're true some harebrained schemes.
It was very much.
See, that wasn't going to work either.
He seemed to have a very much a return attitude here. He wanted to replace the clouds up here with the low wood ceiling. He wanted to. He was like, if we put enough acoustical wooden panels in here, it's going to replicate, the quality of an old-fashioned music hall, which he attributed to factors like, the balcony supports, the boxes, the statue niches. He's
it's
doing
true.
return
That
to
is
tradition.
true, and how it worked. And that's kind of what ended up happening. Okay, so this gets us into like who they hired. They hired this guy named Cyril Harris. So while both Baranek and Newman were like kind of like the high modernist guys, Cyril Harris was like a little more conservative. And his work actually, like before becoming an acoustician, he did dozens of shoebox, what I call a neo shoebox hall all across the country. He did one in Utah. He did one in Washington State. He did one he did them everywhere. He did the Kennedy Center. Like, this was like his bag. But he was hired to fix Philharmonic Hall on the advice of the acoustics panel. And the acoustics panel wasn't, despite being like, pseudo trads or whatever, like they weren't wrong. Like the statues and the niches and all of the neoclassical ornament does like fix a lot of problems with diffusion and like things like basing the hall off of like the precedents of the past would have fixed the problems. And in fact, this reconciliation with modernism that had to happen is still what's going on in the current renovation today. Because they know exactly what they have to do to fix the hall, and yet they still have to make it innovative and interesting. And so, but in the 70s, when Cyril Harris got a hold of the hall, he was already doing work on other projects and knew that like there was a way to do ornament that was what, like in architecture, we have this style called New Formalism, which technically speaking, Max Abramowitz's architecture for the Lincoln Center was a New Formalist project. Like it was a modernist building based on neoclassical proportions, with like neoclassical formal elements, but not ornamental elements. And so, like, basically, Cyril Harris was recreating that inside the concert hall, and he became very good at it. But the thing is he still ran into the same problem, which is that the people who ran Lincoln Center wanted the fundamental problem was, okay, so first of all, like, what he had to do was, because, like, I don't know if you guys saw on the slide, but because Philharmonic Hall had this very weird curved, like, weird fan-like section, or fan-like plan, and, like, weird milk bottle-looking section, he basically, like, the first thing he had to do was, like, okay, like, this just has to be a square. Like, this has to be a cube. We're not going to get around. Like, this just has to be a square. It has to be a shoebox. Right? And that actually fixed a lot of the problems, honestly. But again, we run into the perpetual problem that continues to this very day when it comes to with regards to like acoustic remediation and redevelopment of concert halls, which is that acoustics is fundamentally antithetical to selling a lot of tickets. It just is. The more seats you have, the shittier your hall is going to sound. There's literally like a golden like ratio of seats to square footage that you should have. And like basically anything with more than like 2,000 seats, and even 2,000 is like a little high. Anything more than 2,000 seats, period, like is gonna like you're starting to fall off the cliff there of the bell curve. And the thing is that Cyril Harris knew, and this was like the bugbear of his entire career. His entire life was spent trying to mitigate like the contradictions of capitalism and acoustics. And he knew that what had to happen was that the hall needed to be narrower, and there had to be fewer seats, fewer balconies, and a taller ceiling. Like I said, the classic shoebox formula. And like they wouldn't let him do that. So like what he produced was a hall that sounded better, but because there still had to be so many damn seats, like, and the hall had to be sufficiently wide enough to accommodate those seats, it still sounded like a dog. It sounded like a listenable dog, but it was a dog all the same. And so, like, again, a cursed project. And so ever since, like, the 1980s, when, like, neoclassical postmodernism came back into style, there have been talks about redoing Avery Fisher Hall. And it's so funny how continually cursed this is. Like, when I was in graduate school, for example, there were rumors that, like, Thomas Heatherwick was going to get involved. And everyone was like, oh, fuck, like, here we go again. Like, the worst possible guy to like get involved in any kind of civic project that is like notoriously cursed. The guy who did The Vessel. Like,
oh boy.
Yeah. What if the concert hall made you want to kill yourself?
Yeah.
One thing I like,
yeah, exactly.
It costs you $10 just to get in, regardless of how much the show actually costs.
After one thing I like is that after the first renovation, and the sound still wasn't that great, the New York Philharmonic Orchestra started to, or the members of it started to refer to it as a very fishy hall.
That's cute.
Yes.
That's cute. So shall we get into what they're planning to do to it now?
Oh yeah, I mean, I think this was renovated again in '92. I think just a little bit, but it again didn't work.
Yeah.
And then one thing
No.
which I thought was an interesting fun fact is that the organ from the original hall was sold to the Crystal Cathedral. And they mashed it into
Yeah.
another organ to make a big Franken organ.
Wow, that's
Yeah.
something else, man. I like it, I think. I'm a deeply diseased man.
This is truly
but
like
literally
this is a deeply diseased project, like truly like a stupid project.
Oh yeah.
Like
thanks, Kate. That makes me feel good.
Yeah.
Appreciate it, bud.
Yep. Yep. But it's like the thing is like, okay, yeah, they tried to do some, again, more remediations in 1992 when we had like more information. But again, the budget on that was pretty small, so there weren't that many changes made. And it still didn't fix the fundamental problem, which is that, LOL, the hall is the wrong shape.
Yep.
Like, so, okay, now, after all of this, now they're like, now the architects, so first of all, they call these guys Diamond and Schmidt, and like this other acoustician guy whose name I forgot, but like who works usually with Diamond and Schmidt.
Is it Paul Scarborough or Joshua Dax?
Yes, Paul Scarborough.
Okay.
No, Paul Scarborough, who is like an acoustician. Everyone in acoustics has worked at everywhere else. Scarborough started his own firm, I think in the 80s. But anyways, he's kind of like a minor character in acoustics, but it's good as shit that they hired him because like he's like kind of like acoustically conservative, but that's what you need in a project like this, which is like finally we actually need a little bit of conservatism in here. So what they're planning on doing is actually what should have been done all along. They're removing balconies, thank Christ. So you have that spaciousness above the highest seated listener. They're narrowing the walls. They're fixing the concert hall. And you know what? There will be less seats. Oh my God, there will be fewer seats in Avery Fisher Hall. This is the truest. This is like the longest time coming victory for like the entirety of our jaded field, like ever. Diamond and Schmidt is really known for doing kind of like what we call a modified shoebox hall, which is like a shoebox, but like kind of like slightly different in form and in other ways. And so like they did like a project in 2015 in Montreal that is like considered pretty good. But again, like they also have they're kind of like the like Scarborough and like Diamond and Schmidt, who often work together, are kind of like the Cyril Harrises of this generation of acousticians. These are the kind of projects that they work on, and they're still like having to deal with the bugbear of having a hall that is like classically oriented in terms of like acoustics and like architecture, but has to also be modern, but also has to like make money. So like this is like his cross to bear now. Poor Paul Scarborough. And he's a good acoustician in my opinion. He's definitely capable. It's definitely glad that they didn't just hire the priciest guy. They're doing the cool model thing where they build a big big scale model and like do measurements inside, which always also takes really good pictures. And so that's like a really solid way to kind of like guess how a concert hall is going to sound. So like actually after all these years and like billions of dollars, literally billions, not even counting for inflation, like finally Avery Fisher Hall, now David Geffen Hall, having dodged the bullet of Thomas Heatherwick, will now finally be unfucked.
Hopefully.
Jesus Christ.
Inshallah. This is like
Inshallah.
This is like a $550 million renovation, I think, to finally make the thing work.
Yeah, they gotta do a lot of stuff.
Oh, yeah.
They're basically gutting it and redoing it. The pictures I've seen look really nice, actually. It looks like, honestly, like a pretty tastefully done project. They're doing some nice, cool, modern diffusive surfaces to get like what you would usually get off of like dripping ornament. Yeah, it's going to be a nice project. And I think it's going to sound, no matter what they do, it will probably sound better than what was previously happening. But yeah, so that is the end of the long story of Philharmonic Hall. Hopefully my goal is that someone will send me out there to review it when it's done, because God, I really need closure on this. Like, please please, I wrote my master's thesis on this. Like, I had like dug in like the archives of like acousticians. I like, made models. I did all this stuff. Like, this is like my white whale as an academic, is like this era of acoustics, which was like the worst ever era of acoustics. Because like failure is really fascinating to me. Things that suck are really fascinating to me. That's why I like Do McMansion Hell. Like, ugly architecture is like my favorite kind. I think like, yeah. And this had all of it. This had everything. This had like the failures of modernism, the failures of urban renewal, had like the failures of like scientific hubris. It had like the fundamental conflict between things that sound good and things that make money. I mean, it's like a wet dream of like it's like this fascinating like political, social, architectural, cultural phenomenon that like really touches everything that like I love to learn about and love to write about. And so like for there to finally be justice for Philharmonic Hall would be great. But also if it sucks again, that would be top wall and I would never stop laughing. And I would, like
be very
literally
funny.
be like that picture of Jeb that is like the meme. Like, just like, yeah, like I will just like my hands will be up and I'll be like cackling like a little gremlin, because it's like, yeah, this is like what you get. This is, if this project is fucked one more time, then that is just fundamental proof that the ghosts of all those people that they displaced back in the 50s are truly haunting that space.
The conductor has to turn around to the audience and say, please clap.
Yes.
Jeb Memorial Concert Hall.
And the clapping is like all fucked up because the acoustics are bad. Yeah. Incredible.
All right. Well, what did we learn today?
Don't
Acoustics.
displace poor people.
Acoustics
Yes.
are
Or
still
black
guesswork,
people, or
and you
both.
should only use guesswork at any
Yes.
time.
Mm.
Fire off a shotgun in there.
Don't displace poor people.
Yeah.
Yeah, bring back the shotgun.
Bring back the
Mhm.
shotgun.
Like, yeah, it's very acousticians are really weird people, obviously. And like when I was in graduate school, this acoustician named Larry Kierkegaard came to visit us. He's like an old man now, and he brought like a little like marble sample, like a marble countertop sample, and like and a metal spoon. And he made us like use like a special type of microphone, a parabolic microphone, which is like basically like a little satellite dish with like a microphone in it. And he would walk around like tapping the spoon on the marble. And if you listened in the headphones of the parabolic microphone, you could hear like the reflections come back like, it was like, and I was like, these people are freaks, but they are my freaks. Like I had a lot of fun doing architectural acoustics. And it was always like my backup plan that if like I somehow got like canceled or whatever, I could like go and like retire into the world of doing spreadsheets for reverberation time for a living. Though I'd have to probably refresh on my skills here after all these years. But as a historian, I think acoustics is a fascinating subject. And if I had to go back to school, which I probably won't, I'd probably study the history, get a PhD in the history of science and continue this work, which is like, if you can't tell, like I really love this stuff. Like I think it was like my first love ever, as like an architecture critic and as like an academic, and which I'm not anymore. I'm like all kinds of things now, but yeah, I think the main point here is like, this is what you get when you displace poor people. This is what you get when like the Rockefellers try to do Cold War stuff and end up like taking massive L's all around. This is what you get when you try to fit a 19th century concert hall into a 20th century building that refuses to budge. This is what you get when you think that like science solves everything, which it doesn't. Yeah, it has everything. So good.
My real question is, what is the Soviet
Poor Leo
equivalent of
Brannick.
this? There's always a Soviet equivalent. There's got to
Oh, it
be.
must
The thing
be.
is,
The Soviet equivalent of this is made
I
entirely
don't
out of
actually
like
know.
reinforced
Yeah.
concrete, weighs 1,500 tons.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it makes the People's Palace look like a shoebox.
It has
Oh,
a
yeah.
rocket on it for some reason, or afterburners.
well, the thing about the Soviets is that they reused, for them, like it was very important to like reuse the Gilded Age concert halls of the Russian aristocracy and like make them palaces of the people. than it was to like reclaim them and like stake their claim there than it was to build new concert halls, which of course they did. But I actually don't know that much about Soviet concert halls because there's not a lot of academic information on it published in anything other than Russian, which is actually why I was learning Russian at some point because I wanted to like figure that out. I know a little bit more about like Yugoslavian concert halls, which are kind of more like you were describing. They were like big concrete modernist slabs. Ditto Venezuela and South America in general. Actually, South American concert hall architecture is really fascinating, but we don't have time to go into that. But the comparison that I make actually is one to social democracy, for example. So like at the same time that all of this was happening, like the Berlin Philharmonic was built, and the Berlin Philharmonic was like equally as important as Philharmonic Hall in shaping the history of acoustics. It was like, I think, probably the most influential concert hall of the 20th century. But it's very different. Like, it was built entirely with public funds. It didn't displace anyone because Berlin had been bombed to shit, and what they built on it was like an empty field that was bombed to shit. And so like they didn't displace anyone. Welcome. That was the war. Yeah. They let their acoustician, Lothar Kramer, go basically absolutely ham and do like this weird vineyard style thing. No one knew how it was going to turn out. And in fact, people didn't really like it at first, but now it's considered to be one of the greatest concert halls of all time. And every new concert hall is basically like a stepchild of the Berlin Philharmonic. It's my favorite concert hall on earth. And Hans Scharoun was the architect, and he was kind of he had very like social democratic views about how it should have been done. Like, it should have been an open plaza, open to the people. Like, it should like the democracy of the concert hall was all in that, like, everyone had great sightlines and great acoustics. Like, it was not separated by hierarchy. The only hierarchy in the Berlin Phil is the cost of tickets. But architecturally speaking, everyone gets a good seat, especially if you're a student, then the cost of tickets doesn't matter. But yeah, so this was a very different way of thinking than like I mean, it's imperfect from like a political perspective and kind of like idealistic, but it was definitely improvement over like the capitalist, so pure capitalist, not social democratic, not even, and I'm talking like Euro social democracy. I'm not even talking like old school Rosa Luxemburg social democracy. I'm talking like basic like post-war welfare state shit. And so, but it's much better, for example, than like the American capitalist like way of doing things, which is how we ended up in the Philharmonic Hall mess. Which where like seat prices and like seating and selling tickets mattered way more than anything else. And so on the one hand but you still on both hands got concert halls that like improved the science of concert halls. But it took actually quite a long time for them to understand why Philharmonic Hall or why the Berlin Philharmonic worked. It took them about like 10 or 15 years of, and there was actually a guy from New Zealand named Harold Marshall who figured out that it had to do with the terrace balconies end up like sending like what they call early lateral reflections, which are the reflections that provide clarity to sound. So it's like why if you have really strong early lateral reflections, you have basically you can understand what's going on in the music. And then everything that comes, the late reflections are what give the space its spaciousness. And so like the volume of the space combined with the terraces like provided like a really nice acoustics profile that kind of sent early lateral reflections to everyone instead of just like to people sat in like more favorable places. And there's always still bad seats in every hall. Ironically, the bad seats in the Berlin Phil are the ones that are now taken by rich people because they're like the private boxes. Aha. Those are the worst seats in the hall. Yeah.
Good.
Based acoustics.
All right, I think that's it.
Yeah.
I think that's it, but that gives you an example of like what other people did that was really good. I stand.
I definitely enjoy the theory of build it now, figure out how it works 15 years later.
Mm-hmm. I like that they have a cure time of like 50 years.
Yeah, meanwhile, the medieval masons building cathedrals are like, whoa, 50 years? That's real fast.
Well, those things like universally have terrible acoustics.
Also true. Because they need another 500 years.
Well, it was developed for a different type of music.
Well, this is true.
Yeah. All right. I think that's it.
Well, we have a segment on this podcast.
I gotta go to Slovenia now.
Safety third. Hold on, I'll make this quick.
Shake hands with danger.
Hello, Justin, Alice, Yay, Liam, and potential guest.
Love the
Kate.
pictures.
Yes.
Hello, guest, or whatever. Hi, Kate. Hi, listener.
I leave my name redacted and write to you today with my experience in narrowly becoming chunky marinara. I work for a company that installs and repairs ATMs along with safes and other various bank-related goodies. Our company does tend to keep safety in mind and allows us to take safety into our own hands. Hence why I wear a bullet-resistant vest and carry the pride of Austria with me every day.
Nice.
Nice. That being said, my CEO has a tendency of agreeing to some of the stupidest requests from banks that I have ever heard. In this instance, a bank had built a new branch and had us moving everything between the two locations. This eventually came down to moving the safety deposit boxes. These are normally installed via crane as the bank vault is being built, as even some of the smaller ones can weigh around 1,800 kilograms. That's 4,000 pounds. These were not smaller ones and weighed easily over 2,000 kilograms. Given that they had already finished construction of the second bank, the luxury of a crane was unavailable. My manager rented some equipment that would allow us to get one safety deposit box off the others as they're stacked like bunk beds. The equipment is designed to slip its arm in and elevate whatever the arms are under. This equipment, which is shaped like a stick figure, I assume it's one of those manual lift things, right? Was obviously never intended for the purpose we were applying it to. I noted this upon reading the weight guide, which was capped at 600 kilograms.
Oh boy.
My boss muttered, "It's probably fine," before cranking the device up. We watched the steel spine bend like a strand of licorice, all where the safety deposit box barely moved. Being probably not fine, we pulled the lifter out and began brainstorming. We eventually settled on the Jenga tower method. See attached images.
Oh no.
We built the tower and then used pry bars and good old-fashioned elbow grease to move the box onto the tower. We then used car jacks to elevate one side at a time before pulling out the plank out of place and then carefully and slowly lowering the box at an angle.
This is the most dangerous shit I've ever heard.
During this process, I ended up near the far wall of the vault, which is comprised of lots of concrete and steel plating. This put me in a position where if the box slipped, it would pin me against a practically immovable wall.
I would simply not be in that position.
Knowing the potential crushing hazard, we worked slowly, taking at least an hour and a half to get down to the ground, where we could load it up and cart it out on a pallet jack. I didn't notice at the time, but I'm happy my coworker documented the entire event. If something had happened, he could have delivered the video to my family to explain why my remains came packaged in a Campbell's tomato soup can.
Yeah, why does your camera film with a Live Leak logo on the top left?
Oh, it is chunky marinara.
Luckily, no bad events transpired, though I doubt I will ever agree to such a task ever again. And thankfully, I'm still around to be able to listen to your podcast. So thank you for what you do.
You're
Cheers,
welcome.
Name redacted.
Thanks, name redacted.
Yes, thank you, Name redacted.
Shake hands for danger.
Our next episode is on the Tacoma Narrows Bridge.
No,
disaster.
it
It's
isn't.
not. No, it's not.
No,
No,
it's
it's
not.
not. No, it's
No,
not.
it's
not.
It's
No,
on
it's
the
not.
Boston molasses.
Molassica.
I don't believe you.
Molassica.
I gave you the book and everything, motherfucker.
All right. Plugs, commercials before we go, please.
Alice, go. Then Liam.
Trash Future, Kill James Bond podcasts. Listen to them with your ears.
Lions Led by Donkeys and my new Philly sports podcast, 10,000 Losses. Go read
boy.
McMansion Hell. Kate, plug your thing. Kate.
Oh, yeah.
There
Go
we
read
go.
McMansionHell.com, a blog
Yes.
about ugly houses that I also run.
Also subscribe to her cycling
Yes.
newsletter.
And yes, derailleur.net, like the part of the bike. It's very cool if you like cycling. Even if you don't,
Yeah.
it's like, I don't know, sports story time. I have to go to Slovenia now, actually. So
Okay.
Bye,
And
Kate.
next Tuesday, Kate and I are on Guest Crit, which is an architecture criticism stream, which is run by the folks at Failed Architecture, Kevin and Michael, who we had on the podcast previously. It's going to be a good time. We're going to talk about trains. So yeah, listen to that. I'll put a link in the description there. I think that's next Tuesday, the 26th of October, at 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, I think. All right.
Bye, everybody.
All right.
Bye.
That's it.
I'm gonna go fucking lay down.
All right.